Hey everyone, welcome back to part 3 of our Explainer series. Today we're going to do something really interesting. We're diving into an easy beginner's guide on how the FBI actually handled the entire UFO craze during a truly fascinating decade, specifically from 1968 to 1977. Now you know the era. We're talking moon landings, massive sci-fi blockbusters hitting theaters, and just skyrocketing public curiosity about what's out there. So we're going to strip away the Hollywood fiction, completely forget the movies for a second, and look directly at the actual declassified documents. We want to see exactly how the Bureau dealt with a public that was absolutely desperate for answers. Okay, let's get into it.
So I want you to take a second and just ask yourself a question. Be totally honest here. Consider your own assumptions about how government jurisdictions work. If you had looked up into the night sky back in the late 1960s, seen some strange lights darting through the clouds, maybe even spotted a flying saucer, who exactly would you call? Do you think the FBI acted as the real-life X-Files, swooping into small towns in dark helicopters, wearing black suits and sunglasses to lock down the evidence? Because as we're about to see, the general public for sure thought that was the case.
All right, here is the syllabus for our beginner's course today. 1. The public demands answers. 2. Wild theories and claims. 3. The official FBI stance. 4. The White House asks. And 5. Our summary and final thoughts.
Okay, Section 1. The public demands answers.
Let's start by looking at everyday citizens. Because these weren't necessarily wild conspiracy theorists making these requests. These were just everyday folks who genuinely thought the FBI was the ultimate go-to authority on unidentified flying objects. Look at this document. It's a perfectly polite, handwritten letter from March 1968. It comes from Jane Ferry, who is a student at Glendale City College out in California. And she's literally just looking for some information for her semester research paper on the UFO controversy. I mean, picture the innocence here. Neat handwriting on lined notebook paper, mailed off with total, genuine hope. It's just a completely standard request from a student trying to get her homework done, reaching out to the federal government, assuming they have some tidy public relations packet just waiting to be mailed out to curious citizens. And I love this because it brilliantly illustrates the absolute innocence of the public's expectation at the time. Look at what she writes. I would appreciate it very much if you could send me this information before March 20th, as I would like to get started as soon as possible. She is politely asking the FBI to essentially mail her a ready-made study guide on flying saucers, completely unaware of the absolute bureaucratic brick wall she is about to crash into.
Well, here is that cold, bureaucratic reality. This is the official response, stamped and sent just a few days later, directly from Director J. Edgar Hoover himself. He politely but extremely firmly responds that unidentified flying objects are simply not within the jurisdiction of the FBI. He doesn't offer her any secret files, no mysterious hints. Instead, he just tells her he is forwarding a copy of her communication straight to the Department of the Air Force. It's just a completely standard, uncompromising brush-off.
Moving on to Section 2, Wild Theories and Claims.
Now, what happens when the letters arriving at FBI headquarters aren't just polite requests for homework help from college students? What if they're explosive, highly detailed conspiracy theories? Let me ask you this. How do you think the FBI handled claims that were legitimately dangerous? Imagine receiving a letter claiming that UFOs were actively causing commercial airline crashes. You'd assume alarms would go off, right? You'd think agents would be immediately dispatched to interview the witness, secure the area, the whole shebang. Well, let's look at a much darker public inquiry from 1969 where a citizen confidently claimed exactly that.
Check out these documents. They show a lengthy, meticulously typed letter from an ordinary citizen addressed directly to Director Hoover. This writer claimed that a real, incredibly tragic December 1963 Pan Am crash in Elkton, Maryland, which, by the way, actually resulted in the heartbreaking loss of 81 lives, was not caused by a lightning strike, as the Civil Aeronautics Board had definitively reported. Instead, this citizen confidently claimed the plane hit literal air mines that had been laid by a UFO they had personally spotted hovering over New Jersey the day before.
And notice the sheer level of detail the writer goes into here. They didn't just casually mention a theory in passing. No, they listed out their quote-unquote determined facts, claiming they had arrived at these conclusions after conducting several hundred experiments. The really crucial point here is that they concluded these crafts weren't actually extraterrestrial aliens at all, but rather cleverly designed Russian missiles camouflaged to look like flying saucers. They noted the craft had tremendous speed, wobbled on occasion, made no noise except for a distinct whoosh or hum, and featured pulsating multicolored lights.
So let's compare the expectation with the reality here. Your expectation might be that an explosive claim regarding an international adversary and a fatal commercial airline crash would immediately trigger a massive multi-agency investigation. You'd think the phones would be ringing off the hook in Washington. The reality? The FBI literally stamped the side of the letter unrecorded and tossed it into a file with absolutely zero action taken. I mean it. No agents were dispatched. No sprawling investigations were opened. It was treated simply as non-actionable eccentric correspondence and completely ignored.
All right, Section 3, the official FBI stance.
Let's skip ahead a few years to 1972 and see how this dismissive attitude builds into an absolutely ironclad official policy of denial across the entire Bureau. By the early 1970s, you can really tell the Bureau was clearly just tired of the endless runaround with the public. They were fielding constant letters, requests, and tips day in and day out. And this brings us to a spectacularly blunt letter sent in February 1972 to a Miss Mary Beth Martine in Pennsylvania, who had written in asking for UFO information. Let's just read Hoover's response directly. The investigation of unidentified flying objects is not and never has been a matter that is within the investigative jurisdiction of the FBI. Look at the definitive, uncompromising language Hoover uses here, is not and never has been. He is firmly shutting the door on the FBI UFO myth once and for all. He isn't just saying, we aren't looking into it right now. He is aggressively rewriting the public's assumption, making it abundantly clear they have literally never been the agency responsible for this.
Which brings us to Section 4, the White House asks.
But what if the request doesn't come from a college student or a conspiracy theorist? What if the inquiry comes from the absolute highest office in the land? Does the FBI's jurisdiction magically change if the president's staff starts asking about UFOs? You would naturally assume that when the White House comes calling, demanding coordination and information, the FBI suddenly finds a way to get involved and maybe bend their own rules a little bit, right?
Let's move to 1977 and see how this unfolds. This incredibly fascinating internal FBI memorandum details a direct phone call received from Jody Powell, a high-ranking member of the president's staff. Powell was inquiring about how the executive branch should handle the sudden influx of information relating to UFO sightings from the public. And what's really crucial here is the context. Powell specifically noted that the U.S. Air Force had already closed their official investigation into these matters several years prior. So the White House is essentially looking for a brand new agency to take point and field these questions.
But look at the FBI's response. Even with the White House asking for coordination, the FBI didn't flinch. Their internal memo explicitly advised the White House that, as far as the FBI is concerned, there appears to be no conceivable jurisdiction for us to conduct any inquiries. They essentially told the president's staff exactly what they told Jane Ferry, the college student, almost a decade earlier. No jurisdiction means no jurisdiction, no matter who is asking.
And finally, Section 5, summary and final thoughts.
We've covered a vast amount of historical ground in this explainer today, from the late 60s right through the late 70s. So let's quickly summarize the core concepts of this beginner's guide. The myth and the reality are simply light years apart. While the public myth says the FBI actively investigates UFOs, the reality is they consistently denied all jurisdiction. The myth says they hide secret alien evidence. The reality is they just treated it as annoying paperwork and forwarded it all to the Air Force. The myth says the FBI bends its rules for VIPs. The reality is they maintained they had no conceivable jurisdiction, even when the president's own staff came knocking. And that brilliantly illustrates the true historical dynamic here. Which really leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question. If the FBI was literally nothing more than a frustrated middleman continuously trying to clear their desks, what profound truths are actually hiding in those Air Force archives that the Bureau kept pointing everyone toward? That is something you'll have to consider for yourself. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep your eyes on the skies.